Let's take a trip through the 10 decades of our church's history. We begin in Sweden. Between 1840 and 1920, more than 1 million Swedes left their homeland and came to the U.S. They often worked in the trades and as domestic servants. Many of them ended up serving wealthy East Coast and Midwest families. When those families fled cold winters to come to the resort town of Pasadena, California, the Swedes came with them, getting off the train at the last stop before Los Angeles. In 1922, 26 of these immigrants, including Betsy Peterson and Christine and Anne Magny, became the charter members of the Swedish Evangelical Tabernacle. A.G. Sporrong was called to be the first pastor. Big families meant that they soon began a Sunday school. They loved singing hymns in Swedish. They formed a choir. They scrimped and saved to purchase property, and in 1924 were able to move from borrowed space into their own church building, now the site of what we call the Gathering Place.
The Depression in the 1930s blunted Pasadena's tourist economy. Church members who had lost jobs had time for an amazing task. They dug a basement out by hand from under the church building to make room for a growing number of young people. It's now this space we call Fellowship Hall and home to our own young people. During this decade, the biggest change in the church related to language. Since the younger generation was more comfortable in English than Swedish, and since the church wanted to serve more people in the community, gradually services and meetings came to be conducted in English. By 1940, the switch was complete.
The 1940s brought growth to Pasadena. It was now linked to downtown Los Angeles by the Arroyo Seco Parkway. New tech companies emerged from World War II. Caltech was becoming a preeminent school for engineering and science. JPL was established. At the church, Pastor Arvid Carlson, who served for 17 years, began his tenure in 1946. A new sanctuary was completed in 1947. Missions interest increased when the church sent one of their own, Anne Berg, to the Belgian Congo in 1944. The church excitedly participated in the Billy Graham Evangelistic Crusade in Los Angeles in 1949. The Cradle Roll program was revitalized to serve new mothers in Pasadena and invite them and their families to Sunday school and church. Between 1946 and 1951, the church doubled in size.
Pasadena and the church continued to grow in the 1950s. One part of this growth was a new building on the church campus. Sunshine Hall added classroom space and was completed in barn-raising style in 1951. Off campus, the church helped build or launch a total of 10 new churches in Southern California. Missionaries to Japan, Korea, and other locations were sent out. Norman Johnson, the music director, formed youth choirs, adult choirs, and an orchestra. The church began to be more ethnically diverse as people like Eugene and Virginia Lowe, the Temesians, Kavarians, Gadigians, and Malgians joined. The first youth pastor was called, and outreach through ministry to children and youth continued.
The 1960s brought even more growth to both the city and the church. The expanding youth ministry led to the building of Carlson Hall, with its gym and classrooms. It was dedicated in 1964. In 1963, Paul Larson became senior pastor. Roland Tabell also joined staff as music director in this decade. Campus Club, an outreach to high school students, flourished. The congregation grew to a peak of about 700 people, including many youth who later became leaders in the denomination and beyond. As the church entered the 1970s, these young leaders supported local outreach and went into pioneering cross-cultural missions.
But the next decade, the 1970s, wasn't an easy time for the city of Pasadena. The church also had a difficult pastoral transition at this time, and this meant that it celebrated its 50th anniversary in 1972 with declining membership. But in 1974, Mel White was called as pastor. His background in film and communication, along with Roland Tabell's continued leadership, helped launch an era of visual and dramatic arts in the church. The church began to fill again. Artists created banners and bulletin covers. Sunlight Singers was launched, and the musical drama Resurrection was debuted. Covenant Women started Lucia Fest, a beloved tradition, successful outreach, and fundraiser for church projects.
In 1986, Pasadena turned 100. The decade of the 1980s was one in which the church found new ways of doing community outreach, including Kids Club, a community house at 760 Elizabeth Street, tutoring, and ESL classes. There was also an emphasis on family within the church. This included close-knit adult Sunday school classes and mentoring of youth.
The 1990s brought revitalization to Pasadena. Charles Barker, who'd been the youth pastor at PasCov, became the associate and then lead pastor. He served through the 1990s and into the mid-2000s. Outreach and evangelism continued in fresh, new ways. Ministries to church and neighborhood kids continued. Elizabeth House, a ministry to women in crisis pregnancy, was begun. The campus was completed with the gift of the Corner House in 1998.
What of the decades since the year 2000? Pasadena has experienced change in many ways, both good and hard. The church has continued to grow out of the roots in the past with various branches that support new fruit, always with Jesus at our core.
The property is being renovated. Our facilities are used not only by the church, but also by community partners. The church, which began with 26 Swedish speakers, is now home to people of many different heritages. We still value connection, fellowship, and welcome.
We continue to worship God through music, through drama, and through visual arts. We remain committed to the Word of God as our guide for life.
We value prayer. We practice evangelism through word and deed, both locally and around the world. We continue to be a place for families and intergenerational community.
In the next 100 years, may God continue to receive glory, and may our neighbors continue to be blessed through our worship here at Pasadena Covenant.